Today's submitted material explores how the Oxyzen Smart Ring uses passive biometric sensors and AI to track deep and REM sleep, helping users optimize their daily habits through detailed stage analysis. But right out of the gate, if this piece wants to legitimately connect last night's sleep to today's performance, the author absolutely has to integrate heart rate variability into this opening physiological discussion.
Yeah, completely. I mean, leaving HRV out entirely creates this massive structural gap in the narrative.
Right.
The current draft actually does a meticulous job mapping out the architecture of the sleep cycles, detailing exactly what happens during the night.
Yeah, it highlights how the Ring's AI analyzes all those multiple physiological markers, like it specifically looks at heart rate patterns, respiratory rate, subtle fluctuations in body temperature.
But without heart rate variability, we only have a retroactive log. We are missing the crucial biometric link that tells the user how well their autonomic nervous system actually recovered from the previous day's strain.
Exactly. It's like the author gives the reader a structural blueprint of their rest, but, well, completely omits the structural integrity report for the following morning.
Yeah, we have the data inputs, but the piece lacks the ultimate physiological output that makes those inputs actionable.
I can understand why an author might want to keep the focus tight on basic markers, to avoid overwhelming a mainstream reader. But given the target audience's deep expertise in biotracking, omitting the gold standard metric for recovery just kind of undermines the device's authority.
So to fix this, the author needs to explicitly connect the Ring's existing sensor capabilities to HRV tracking. They have to demonstrate how moving through these specific sleep stages translates into a holistic daily recovery picture.
Right, framing HRV as the ultimate output.
Exactly, the dividend paid out by a good night of deep and REM sleep, showing the reader that these stages aren't just isolated nightly events, but the very mechanisms that restore their HRV for the next morning. It fundamentally changes the stakes of the text.
If I were revising this section, I would introduce an analogy right after listing those foundational sensors. Like, tracking heart rate without HRV is like measuring the speed of a car without checking if there's gas in the tank.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right? The speedometer tells you what is happening right now, but the fuel gauge tells you if you actually have the capacity to keep going.
That frames the mechanism perfectly. And we can also look at this through the lens of the caffeine example currently sitting later in the text.
Oh, yeah. The one where users cut back on late-day caffeine after seeing it disrupt their REM sleep in the app?
Exactly, but the author doesn't explain the underlying mechanism there. Integrating HRV data allows the author to explain exactly why that caffeine ruins the sleep architecture.
Because the caffeine keeps the autonomic nervous system trapped in a sympathetic fight-or-flight state.
Yes, and the target reader understands this physiological mechanism. But by spelling it out in the text, the author explicitly connects the behavioral choice, drinking that 4 p.m. espresso, to the biometric outcome measured by the Ring.
It validates their lived experience with hard data. The author could show how combining the basic sleep stage data with that restored HRV creates a tangible readiness score or recovery score waiting for the user when they wake up.
Which completely transitions the tone of the text, right? It goes from being a retroactive report simply stating, well, here's how you slept, to functioning as a proactive coaching tool.
Right, declaring, here is how ready you are to face today.
When the text integrates the mechanism of HRV, it proves to the reader that the Smart Ring is a comprehensive readiness engine, not just a passive sleep tracker.
But, capturing that highly sensitive HRV data requires the sensor to maintain perfect, uninterrupted contact and a clean optical signal all night.
Right.
And that physical requirement exposes a massive blind spot in the author's argument when they transition into comparing the Ring to wrist-worn devices.
Oh, definitely. The text argues for the Ring's superiority primarily by focusing on physics of the palmar digital arteries.
Yeah, noting that because it's on the finger, it has a superior vascular signal and less random movement than a smartwatch, which sure allows it to achieve medical-grade precision and over 95% sensitivity in sleep stage classification.
And the physical logic there is undeniably sound. I mean, the palm side of the finger has a dense capillary bed and lacks the bone and muscle interference you find on the top of the wrist. It creates a vastly superior environment for photoplethysmography.
But look at what the author completely misses here by hyper-focusing on sensor physics.
they ignore the psychological and behavioral reality of the user actually wearing the device in bed.
Yes, by exclusively discussing the hardware's physical contact with the skin, the text ignores the massive lifestyle advantage of a screen-free, distractionless device for sleep hygiene.
So the argument needs to shift from just highlighting better data collection to highlighting the creation of a better sleep environment. The author has to address the hardware's psychological contact with the user's mind.
If I were editing this, I would challenge the author to contrast the Ring's silent, invisible tracking operation directly against the smartwatch's user interface.
Yeah. Think about the physiological contradiction there. Wearing a glowing screen that buzzes with haptic alerts while simultaneously trying to measure and protect your deepest stages of rest.
Right. Those wrist-based alerts actively disrupt the very sleep architecture the user is trying so hard to optimize.
I hear you, but taking away a user's morning alarm interface or their ability to quickly check the time at 3 a.m. is a massive behavioral ask.
It is.
If the author leans too hard into claiming no screen is automatically better, they risk alienating a huge subset of readers who rely heavily on that risk-based interface to manage their mornings. You can't just wave that friction away in the text.
No, you can't. That friction is absolutely real, which is why the author shouldn't ignore it. They need to lean into it. Deliberately reframe the lack of a screen as a premium feature specifically engineered for rest.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, during the day, a smartwatch is a demanding boss. It orchestrates your schedule and demands your attention. But at night, the Ring acts as a silent night watchman. It observes everything with medical-grade precision, but interrupts absolutely nothing.
That's a great angle. The author could introduce the concept of digital minimalism here, arguing that the Ring allows the user to disconnect from the cognitive load of their notifications while still capturing vital health data.
Exactly. Reframing the missing screen as a protected cognitive space completely neutralizes the objection. It turns a perceived hardware limitation into a psychological luxury.
And to structurally bolster this section, the author also needs to tackle the reality of battery life, because that directly impacts the continuous data gathering we just discussed.
Oh, absolutely. The text should emphasize the Ring's 5 to 7 day battery life.
Yeah, a smartwatch's daily charging requirement usually forces the user to take it off right before bed, which breaks the continuity of the tracking and results in lost sleep data entirely.
Because if the device is sitting on the nightstand charger, it doesn't matter how good its sensors are.
Right. Pointing out that the Ring's passive design ensures it actually stays on the body during the most critical recovery window provides a highly persuasive original angle.
It proves the Ring's superiority not just through clinical capillary accuracy, but through the practical realities of everyday usability. It survives the friction of daily life.
Okay, so the piece establishes the hardware necessary to gather this sensitive data without interrupting the user's sleep. But capturing the data is only half the battle.
Right. The text eventually has to explain the resulting sleep reports to the user.
Yes. And right now, the language being used in that final section to describe these distinct sleep stages is creating a massive barrier to engagement.
The author is relying heavily on dense academic terminology. Like the text defines deep sleep as focusing on cellular repair, immune system function, and declarative memory consolidation.
And then it defines REM sleep as being characterized by rapid eye movements and increased brain activity, noting its essential role in cognitive recovery, emotional regulation, and procedural memory.
I mean, the scientific rigor is clearly there. The author understands that these stages serve distinct, specialized functions.
Yeah, and they are treating the reader with intelligence by distinguishing between declarative memory, cementing facts and concepts into long-term memory, and procedural memory, which is the process of learning how to do a task.
But that textbook tone feels entirely disconnected from the user's actual lived experience and their immediate daily ambitions.
It reads like a glossary in a medical journal rather than a guide to optimizing human performance.
The author clearly leaned into phrases like declarative memory consolidation because they wanted to establish clinical authority. But, well, in modern editorial writing, authority doesn't come from using the most complex laboratory jargon. It comes from extreme relevance.
Right. The reader might intellectually understand the definition of these words, but they don't feel the physical impact of them. The tone becomes an impenetrable wall.
So to tear that wall down, the author needs to pair each of these scientific terms with a tangible, real-world scenario.
We want to maintain that deep clinical expertise the author obviously possesses, but translate those laboratory mechanisms into relatable outcomes. The data has to speak the user's language.
Let's look at how we can restructure the section defining deep sleep. Instead of merely stating that deep sleep aids in cellular repair and just moving on to the next bullet point, the author needs to explain what cellular repair actually looks like for the reader on a random Tuesday morning.
Right. Like, deep sleep is what helps a user's muscles physically recover after a grueling deadlift session.
Exactly. It is the biological mechanism that repairs microtears in muscle tissue after a long weekend run.
Giving the concept physical weight instantly transforms it. And the author needs to apply that exact same translational strategy to the cognitive side of the text.
Yeah, for REM sleep, instead of just defining procedural memory as learning how to do a task, the text should describe it as the biological process of nailing a complex work presentation you've been practicing for weeks.
Or finally mastering a difficult new chord progression on the guitar without thinking about your finger placement.
Yes, or even navigating a high-stakes social interaction at the office without losing your emotional regulation.
Taking the clinical concept of procedural memory and mapping it directly onto the user's personal ambitions makes the writing infinitely more compelling.
The author might push back, though. They might say that providing everyday examples dilutes the scientific purity of the piece, or perhaps suggest that focusing on long-term disease prevention might be a more serious angle.
Sure, and focusing on long-term disease prevention is certainly valid scientifically, but given the immediate day-to-day focus established earlier in the text, like adjusting caffeine intake to smooth out the next morning, grounding these terms in daily performance aligns much better with the author's established pacing and intent.
That's a good point.
If the text tells the user, your REM sleep cycle last night is the reason you locked in that new skill today, it completely changes the dynamic of the relationship.
It really does. It transforms the ring from a passive medical monitor into an active participant in the user's daily success.
By grounding declarative memory into a scenario like effortlessly recalling the names of 3 new clients in a morning pitch meeting, the science transitions into a highly personal tool for growth.
It bridges the gap between the isolation of the laboratory and the reality of the user's living room.
Okay, let's briefly recap the critical path of our exploration today to help the author elevate this already robust piece of writing. First, we identified the necessity of integrating heart rate variability into the opening physiological discussion.
Right, expanding beyond just heart rate and temperature to include HRV completes the biometric picture. It effectively bridges the gap between nighttime data collection and next-day nervous system readiness.
Second, we explored how to create a much more original device comparison against smartwatches. Instead of relying solely on the physics of the palmar arteries, the author must leverage the psychological benefits of a screen-free, distraction-less design.
Proving that superior sleep hygiene requires eliminating nocturnal alerts.
And finally, we address the communication of the data itself. The author needs to translate the dense clinical jargon defining deep and REM sleep into relatable, everyday outcomes.
To make this actionable, the author should immediately draft a clarifying sentence connecting the ring's raw sensor outputs to HRV and the resulting morning readiness score.
Next, they need to add a paragraph detailing the behavioral advantages of digital minimalism, specifically noting how preserving battery life and eliminating smartwatch glow directly protects the sleep architecture.
And lastly, they must comb through the final section, pairing academic terms like declarative memory consolidation with highly human examples, like recovering from a heavy physical workout or retaining a new complex skill.
We warmly invite you to implement these high-level structural revisions and submit your updated material back to the critique for further exploration. We would love to see how these adjustments refine and empower the narrative.
Absolutely.
Because when tracking human physiology, giving a user raw data without context is like handing them a map without a compass. By completing the physiological picture with HRV, removing the digital distractions of glowing screens, and speaking directly in the language of lived physical experience, you aren't just giving the user a dashboard of metrics, you are giving them the keys to drive their own recovery.
Beautifully synthesized.
Boundaries of your work, and we look forward to reading what you write next.